Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. The Harris-Walz campaign announces a $90 million media spend targeting swing voters. And President Biden will join Vice President Kamala Harris for their first campaign event together since Biden exited the race. NTD's Jason Blair has more.
Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are making an aggressive effort to win over undecided voters. On Wednesday, they announced what they are calling a historic sum of money spent on a short-term media campaign. The $90 million campaign will run the last 3 weeks of August on TV, radio, and digital platforms. The campaign said they'll highlight 4 key areas they think will resonate with their target audience, including Harris's background story, her, quote, commitment to fighting for the people, her focus on Americans' everyday needs, and the difference between her record and former President Trump's. And on Thursday, Harris and President Biden will hold their first campaign event together since Biden announced he would not seek re-election.
The president and the vice president will travel to Prince George's County, Maryland, to deliver remarks on the progress they are making to lower costs for the American people.
Biden released a statement Wednesday regarding the July Consumer Price Index. He said, quote, inflation has fallen below 3% and core inflation has fallen to the lowest level since April 2021. We have more work to do to lower costs for hardworking Americans, but we are making real progress, with wages rising faster than prices for 17 months in a row. Also on Wednesday, Republican vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance also commented on the state of the economy under the current administration.
Housing costs have doubled. Grocery prices are up 21%. A record number of Americans are working multiple jobs.
And Friday, Kamala Harris will be in North Carolina to give a speech in Raleigh. She is expected to highlight the details of her economic policy. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Former President Trump today outlining his economic agenda in the battleground state of North Carolina. This comes before Vice President Kamala Harris is set to lay out her economic plan Friday. NTD's Iris Tao has more from Asheville, North Carolina.
Former President Trump on Wednesday giving a speech about the economy right here in the battleground state of North Carolina, which he won in 2020 by just over 1 percentage point. At the top of his agenda here is to lower inflation and talk about how to end tax on tips.
On my first day back in the Oval Office, I will sign an executive order directing every cabinet secretary and agency head to use every tool and authority at their disposal to defeat inflation and to bring consumer prices rapidly down. We'll do it very rapidly. No tax on tips, okay? No tax on tips.
A Trump speech on Wednesday comes just before Vice President Kamala Harris is set to lay out her policy agenda on the economy this upcoming Friday in Raleigh, North Carolina. The two are already getting into an increasingly heated debate about the economy. A new report on Wednesday shows that inflation has now dropped to 2.9%, the lowest level in about 3 years. Kamala Harris's campaign is taking credit for that, saying that it is the result of the work by President Biden and Kamala Harris, adding that in her upcoming address, Harris will address how to make the middle class be better economically and also how to take on greedy corporations. But the Republican National Committee, meanwhile, is noting that even at this level, the inflation rate is more than twice the level than it was back in January 2020 when Kamala Harris first took office as the vice president. And the Trump campaign is linking inflation to what it now calls Kamalanomics, and noting in a statement that families are paying now 30% more for baby food and the price of gas is up 50%. Meanwhile, tomorrow on Thursday, Trump will be giving a second press conference in a week, and this time at his Bedminster Golf Club in New Jersey. It comes as Kamala Harris's campaign says Harris will sit down for a formal interview by the end of this month. Reporting from Asheville, North Carolina, Iris Tao, NTD News.
A New York judge has refused to step down from the New York business records case against Trump. Trump's legal team said the judge's daughter and her political consultancy work posed a potential conflict of interest. Judge Juan Merchan denied a request by Trump's lawyers that he recuse himself from the case. One of Merchan's daughter's clients was Vice President Kamala Harris, who competed for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination. A jury found Trump guilty in May on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. The charges stem from his lawyer Michael Cohen's $130,000 payment to adult film actress Stormy Daniels. Prosecutors argue that the payment was made to avert a scandal before the 2016 presidential election. Merchan is scheduled to sentence Trump on September 18th. Tropical storm Ernesto has intensified into a hurricane, the third of the 2024 Atlantic hurricane season. It has moved north of Puerto Rico, leaving nearly hundreds of thousands of people without power or water. NTD's Christina Corona brings us an update.
The National Hurricane Center says Ernesto is now a Category 1 hurricane and is expected to become a major hurricane by Friday morning. The storm was located about 175 miles northwest of San Juan, Puerto Rico, with sustained winds that reached 75 miles per hour, classifying it as a Category 1 storm. According to Luma, a service provider, more than 695,000 customers are without power in Puerto Rico. 235,000 customers are without water, and over 400 people are in shelters. President Biden issued an emergency declaration for Puerto Rico on Tuesday night. Puerto Rico Governor Pedro Pierluisi has urged residents and tourists to remain away from the waters.
We are particularly warning tourists and our own population to stay away from the ocean. Ocean conditions, particularly in the north and the eastern part of Puerto Rico, are going to be very dangerous.
The highest rainfall total recorded so far is 9.6 inches in Naguabo, Puerto Rico. Ernesto is expected to continue moving through open waters for the remainder of the week, making its closest approach to Bermuda on Friday and Saturday. It's anticipated to intensify into a major Category 3 storm in the coming days. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Ukraine today claims it's advancing deeper into the Kursk region in Russia. That's as both the White House and State Department continue voicing support for Kyiv as the offensive continues.
I expect we'll continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with our Ukrainian partners.
The State Department on Wednesday saying it'll continue supporting Ukraine to defend itself against Russia. This comes a week after Ukraine launched a surprise incursion into Russia's Kursk region. Russia's emergency ministry released this video on Wednesday showing people being evacuated from a town in Kursk. Ukraine, meanwhile, published this video saying it shows the moment its soldiers pulled down a Russian flag. And the incursion continues. Ukraine's army chief gave this update when speaking to President Volodymyr Zelensky.
Since the start of today, troops have advanced around 1 mile in various directions. Since the beginning of this day, we've captured about 100 enemy soldiers.
Newly released satellite footage shows that Russia has dug trenches in the region. Russia's foreign ministry accused Ukraine of stalling potential progress in peace talks.
With their terrorist actions in the Kursk area, Ukraine has, at minimum, put peace talks on pause for a long time. In my opinion, they did this intentionally. Peace talks with an absolutely inadequate enemy is unnatural.
But the White House says peace doesn't depend on Ukraine.
This war can end today. It could, if Russia would stop the war that they started.
Meanwhile, the governor of the Russian Belgorod region says the situation continues to be extremely difficult and tense. Belgorod is next to Kursk, where Ukraine launched a surprise incursion last week.
There are daily shellings by the Ukrainian armed forces, destroyed homes, injured and killed peaceful civilians. Therefore, we have decided to declare a regional-level state of emergency.
The governor says the state of emergency will help to provide more protection.
It's been over 8 months of negotiations for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, and Israel and Hamas have yet to make a deal. The U.S. says it's urgent to make a deal now to prevent a wider war. NTD's Jason Perry has the details.
Officials are headed to Qatar for high-stakes ceasefire talks beginning on Thursday. These talks are aimed at addressing the Israel-Hamas war in the Gaza Strip. Officials from Israel, the United States, Egypt, and Qatar are expected to be in attendance. And U.S. officials have said the time is urgent to reach a deal to prevent a wider war from happening. President Biden said that if a ceasefire deal is reached, then Iran may refrain from attacking Israel, according to Axios. Iran has vowed to attack Israel after Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh was recently killed in Tehran. Haniyeh was previously involved in the ceasefire talks, and his position as political leader of Hamas has been filled by Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, who some believe to be located deep inside a tunnel in the Gaza Strip. However, Hamas said on Wednesday that it would not take part in the latest ceasefire negotiations in Qatar. Hamas official Osama Hamdan said the only way Hamas will participate in the talks is if they focus on implementing the proposal detailed by President Biden in May. The U.S. referred to it as an Israeli proposal, and Hamas agreed to it in principle. But Israel later said that Biden's speech was not entirely consistent with the proposal itself. But how much progress can be made without Hamas taking part in the talks? The U.S. said it expects indirect talks to go ahead as planned and that a ceasefire is still possible. As of now, it's still unclear whether Hamas will participate, but a State Department spokesperson said Tuesday that representatives of Qatar have assured the U.S. they would. A senior U.S. official said most of the work is done, but a deal likely won't be signed Thursday due to about 4 or 5 unresolved issues. Jason Perry, NTD News.
The World Health Organization has once again declared Africa's Mpox outbreak a global health emergency. Officials at the W.H.O. say a deadlier strain of the virus has spread to 4 African provinces that had previously been unaffected. Mpox, previously known as monkeypox, can be transferred from infected animals to humans through close contact. Among the symptoms of the disease, fever, low energy, and back pain. Mpox has been in Central and West Africa for decades. In 2022, cases were confirmed in North America and Europe. The WHO declared Mpox a global health emergency in July of 2022, and it remained in place until the following May. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida announcing today that he won't be running for re-election as president of his ruling Liberal Democratic Party in September. This marks the end of a 3-year term marred by political scandals.
Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said on Wednesday he will step down in September, ending a 3-year term marred by political scandals.
The most obvious first step to show that the Liberal Democratic Party will change is for me to step aside. I will not run for the upcoming presidential election. I will continue to support the new leader who will be elected through the presidential election as a comrade. As the head of the organization, I have no hesitation in taking responsibility for a serious situation, the fundraising scandal caused by a Liberal Democratic Party member.
His exit triggers a contest to replace him as president of the party and, by extension, become the leader of the world's 4th biggest economy. Kishida's public support has been sliding due to revelations about the LDP's ties to the controversial Unification Church and unrecorded political donations made at party events. However, the Prime Minister has also faced public discontent over stagnant wages as Japan's cost of living soars. Kishida is Japan's 8th longest-serving post-war leader and oversaw massive stimulus spending during the COVID-19 pandemic. However, he's stuck with the hawkish security policies of his predecessor Shinzo Abe, who was assassinated in 2022. Abe had unveiled Japan's biggest military build-up since World War II, with a commitment to double defense spending aimed at deterring neighboring China from pursuing its territorial ambitions in East Asia through military force.
A U.S. Army sergeant has pleaded guilty to conspiring to sell military secrets to the Chinese regime. The Justice Department says Corbin Schultz was charged with conspiracy to disclose national defense information. He was also charged with exporting defense articles and data without a license and bribery of a public official. The DOJ says Schultz was an intelligence analyst and held top secret clearance. The indictment says he conspired with someone in Hong Kong that he thought was linked to the Chinese regime. The department says some of the documents he sent included information on U.S. military satellites and Chinese military tactics. Another was a document on Army lessons learned from the Russia-Ukraine war that would apply in defense of Taiwan. The Justice Department says Schultz was paid about $42,000 for the information. He'll be sentenced at the start of next year. And for more in-depth news from China and analysis on what it means for the West, stay tuned for China in Focus tonight on NTD. Tonight's top story, a food delivery rider in China reportedly ordered to kneel after an altercation with a private security guard. The incident has spiraled into a full-blown protest, with hundreds of delivery workers rallying in support. That's tonight at 9:30 p.m. Eastern on China in Focus. The Olympic Games provided a welcome distraction from political strife in France, but President Emmanuel Macron now faces the difficult task of naming a prime minister while facing a political stalemate in parliament. NTD's international correspondent David Vives has the story.
The end of the Olympic Games marks the end of the political truce for the French government. President Emmanuel Macron said he would wait until mid-August to name a new prime minister. Former Prime Minister Gabriel Attal sent a letter Tuesday to various group leaders to create a coalition in parliament. But political negotiations have been slow and the president has not responded to the left-wing coalition's proposal for a new prime minister. According to editorialist W.H.O, there is a good chance a coalition will eventually be formed with the left-wing group in parliament.
We can imagine a scenario in which the left would form an alliance with Macron, as he himself has some liberal views. And this would not be impossible because Macron and the left-wing coalition leader share the same vision of a multicultural, diverse society.
W.H.O says even after the president appoints a prime minister, the situation in parliament would still pose a challenge for the new French government.
With an assembly finally with no clear majority, we could have either a situation of stalemate, of political paralysis for a year, since we would have to wait another year before the next dissolution.
One of the most urgent issues for the French government is to restore the public deficit by preparing a budget plan to be presented in September. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Nearly half of British universities are facing budget deficits because of falling numbers of international students. This poses risks to their future and has prompted calls to restructure their business model. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has this report.
British universities are facing financial troubles. According to the higher education regulator, the Office for Students, 40% of universities are in a budget deficit. That means they're spending more than they have coming in. James Tooley, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Buckingham, explains why.
How do they get into this problem? Their business model became over-reliant on international students. This is the key thing, particularly from China, but from many countries.
Tooley said recent visa policy changes have reduced the number of international students coming to the UK. They used to be able to bring their families with them, but the previous administration toughened rules to stop this in most cases, as a way to lower immigration levels. And Tooley says the new Labour government doesn't look like it will change the policy.
So this really upset the universities. They were reliant on the international students because they charge international students whatever they like. The fees are typically fixed for home students, for students from England, and so their complete business model was thrown out of kilter. And this is a severe problem for universities.
A report by the University of Warwick and consultancy firm Public First recommended creating a fund to provide state-backed loans to universities. This $3.2 billion fund would help universities to restructure to prevent collapse. Tooley said he doesn't think the government will allow any of the most prestigious universities to go out of business.
But they will encourage mergers and acquisitions and link-ups so that if there's a university in town X that looks as though it's suffering, then it might link up with another university in town Y and become the University of XY.
Tooley said British universities should start thinking about how to manage their resources more effectively in the face of a receding customer base, be it saving money in departments or using their buildings more efficiently and attracting more students too. And he added that universities themselves have contingency plans.
So no foreign students, if you're thinking about coming to the UK to university, no foreign students should be deterred by anything that I've said or anything they've heard, because the universities want you to come.
He said that if anything financially extreme happens to a British university, students will still be taken care of very well thanks to these contingency plans. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Joining me now to discuss the Trump and Harris campaigns and their economic policies is Amber Duke. She's the Washington editor for The Spectator and a Steamboat Institute fellow. Amber, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you again. To begin, Trump saying today in North Carolina that Americans would be better off financially with him in the White House. That says Harris is set to lay out her economic policy this Friday, also in North Carolina. How do you view Trump's speech today?
I think it was a smart thing to do today in particular, because we just saw the July year-over-year inflation numbers come out, and they were very much a mixed bag, leaning to negative for the Harris campaign. We saw that although inflation, the inflationary rate came down slightly to 2.9%, it still is nearly 2 points above where it was when Biden and Harris took office, and prices are still up 20%. Including really significant increases in some key consumer goods like electricity, groceries, and rent. So if Kamala Harris is going to argue that she is the economic champion for the middle and working class of America, then she's going to have to explain why she's been unable to achieve that with President Joe Biden over the past 4 years. And this is an issue that a majority of voters say that they trust Trump on more. So it's a simple comparison for him to say, were you better off in economic terms 4 years ago before the pandemic, or are you better off now? And for most voters, the answer is very clear that it was 4 years ago when their wages were keeping up with it, even surpassing inflation, whereas now they're actually, in real terms, they've gone down.
And what do you make of the choice of Asheville as the location for his rally and speech today?
It's an interesting choice because Asheville in North Carolina is considered a little bit more of a liberal area. It's kind of reminiscent of how Trump decided to do a rally in the heart of Atlanta in Georgia, sort of attacking these Democratic strongholds in what are considered now purple but previously red states. I think it shows an air of confidence, actually, that he is willing to take a pit stop in those places and try to appeal to voters that might traditionally vote Democrat.
When it comes to polls, polling market shows Harris's odds of beating Trump are at an all-time high. What do you think is behind this? How seriously should the Trump campaign be taking these recent poll numbers?
Well, of course, they should take it seriously. Anytime your opponent is tied with you or leading in the polls, you want to take that seriously. I would say from a general perspective, when we look at trends over the past couple of months, we saw that Harris received a significant bump shortly after Joe Biden was pushed out of the race by his Democratic colleagues, and she was elevated to the top of the ticket, which is normal. There's always excitement after a candidate enters a race, and even more so now because a lot of Democrats were not happy with Biden at the top of the ticket. In fact, about 2/3 said that they wish they had someone else to vote for. So she's enjoying that natural boost in excitement. And we've actually seen her poll numbers start to come down a little bit and even out to where they were when Trump and Biden were pretty much neck and neck ahead of that first debate. So at this point, the fundamentals of the race haven't changed a whole lot. The only real advantage that Harris has right now is a little bit of momentum on her side and the fact that she can perhaps make an age argument that she is the younger, fresher candidate. But on the issues and in terms of the ground game that's been taking place in the swing states, none of that has really changed. All of these polls are practically within the margin of error. The candidates are effectively tied.
Zooming out a bit, how big of a role do you think media coverage has played into these poll results?
I'm sure a significant amount. Kamala Harris has enjoyed glowing coverage from the media, and that's without ever having to sit down for an interview with them. And we know historically Kamala Harris has not been a great retail politician. She has struggled in long form and unscripted interviews, as well as in unscripted campaign and White House events. And I think when voters start to hear more from her when she's off of a teleprompter or facing some tough questioning from the media, that might be a way for her to be exposed to voters in a negative manner that could bring down poll numbers. The question is, will the mainstream media really push her to do that? She says that she plans to sit down for an interview before the end of the month. That's only a couple of weeks away. So we're all waiting patiently with bated breath to see where and when she's going to do that interview.
And the latest poll from Cook Political Report is showing Harris gaining ground in swing states. She now leads in Arizona, Michigan, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Trump is tied with her in Georgia. Now, he still holds a slim lead in Nevada, but Harris has narrowed this margin by 6 points since May. Now, this comes as the Harris campaign is launching a $90 million advertising effort targeting battleground states. How do you see the Trump campaign countering these efforts?
The Kamala Harris campaign is being incredibly aggressive, as they should be, with the momentum on their side. Now is certainly the time for them to spend a lot of money and try to boost their grassroots efforts as well. The Trump campaign is hitting her pretty hard right now on a more streamlined attack message, which is that she is basically a political opportunist, a chameleon, someone who has changed her opinion so many times that voters really have no idea what they're getting if they put her into office, or even worse, that she might be a secret vehicle for radical left-wing progressive policies. And it doesn't help her case that one of her ploys to win Nevada is stealing one of Trump's signature policy proposals that he came out with in June, which is to eliminate taxes on tips for service workers. Now, Kamala Harris, while being a member of the Biden administration, gave the tie-breaking vote for the Inflation Reduction Act, which gave $80 billion additional dollars to the IRS, and also implemented a program that would give the IRS a greater ability to track tips from service workers. So she's going to have a hard time squaring that policy record with what she says she supports now. And that's why a media interview is so important, because I think she has to explain how she got from where she was as one of the most radical senators in 2019 running in the Democratic primary to where she is today, where she's adopting some of Trump's policy positions and trying to run as a more moderate candidate. The question is, was she being dishonest then? Was she being dishonest now? Or did she have some kind of massive political conversion? And how exactly and why did that happen?
And Amber, with the DNC coming up, what do you see the Trump campaign doing to move the conversation back into the Republicans' favor?
What Trump typically does during these big Democratic events is that he counter programs. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him hold some large rallies in swing states. We saw, a few years ago, back when the Democrats were going through that same primary process in 2020, when they had their first event in New Hampshire, Donald Trump came up and held a record-breaking rally at the University of New Hampshire, just blocks away from where a lot of these Democratic candidates were making their case and waiting for the votes to come in. I would not be surprised to see a similar strategy here for him to try to take as much media attention away as possible from the Democratic National Convention. At the same time, he probably doesn't mind voters tuning in if he thinks that the message that comes out of the convention is going to turn them off. This is going to be a place where Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are going to have to finally unveil their policy platform and talk about what it is they actually support. If those things are not polling well with voters, then you want voters to tune in and see for themselves that they're not going to like what the ticket is selling.
Amber Duke, Washington editor at The Spectator and Steamboat Institute fellow, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
What economic policies did Tim Walz implement as governor of Minnesota? If Walz becomes vice president, how might he influence America's policies? Here's the story.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz's economic policies aim to directly help the working and middle class by taxing businesses and the wealthy.
It was nurses, it was teachers, and it was state and local government employees that built this nation.
Minnesota has the sixth highest state tax rate in 2024 at around 6.875%.
Ever since his first year in office, he has pursued numerous tax increases on businesses, on wealthier individuals. He's even proposed increasing the gasoline tax.
Tax expert Pete Sepp says Walz was a typical left-of-center politician back when he was a representative. He occasionally voted for Republican bills. Over time, his policies moved more and more leftward.
His very first year in office, he proposed spending away a surplus that was accumulating in the Minnesota budget and raising taxes by more than $1 billion to be able to spend even more money.
A big priority as governor, fighting childhood poverty.
We have the best
child tax credit in the country.
Every Minnesotan can claim $1,750 per qualifying child with no limit on the number of children claimed. The credit is also refundable, meaning the government gives you money if the credit exceeds the amount of taxes you owe. Walz also created a universal free breakfast and lunch program for all grade school students. He signed legislation that gave workers 12 weeks of paid leave, and he's a big union supporter.
When unions are strong, America's strong.
Walz himself was a member of the American Federation of Teachers. He also walked a picket line with striking auto workers.
July's consumer price index rose slightly as expected by 0.2% month over month. How are everyday Americans feeling about the state of the U.S. economy? NTD was out at the National Mall in D.C. to gather insights from consumers.
How do you feel about the general state of the U.S. economy?
Political. Purely political. It's all run by big dollars.
It could be better. Could be better.
We got a lot of people that are looking for work every day, every single day. They're looking for work, and they can't find work.
Inflation is being reduced. I think it's a very good time. It's one of the best economies in the world right now.
I build projects. I have townhouses I built, and I borrowed money from the bank. I started my loan at 5%. Now my construction loan's at 9.5%. I tapped out my home equity, started at 2%. My home equity is now at 11%. I'm just a middle-class guy, and it's hard for middle-class people to try to get ahead.
Buying a house that's 1,000 square feet should not cost $400,000 or $500,000. In Washington State.
Who do you feel has the better economic policy, Trump or Harris?
Honestly, I think both are really unorganized right now. I think they're focusing too much on social policy and aren't addressing economics enough.
My vote goes to Trump, 100%.
For the people, Harris.
Trump. For a while, I lived in Kentucky. I'm retired military. The coal miners on the eastern side of Kentucky were struggling because of policies. I'll just leave it at that. He reversed some of that.
A lot of stuff that he does that's great gets unnoticed simply because of his bedside manner. So again, to me, I do think Trump is the better businessman. One of the things that he's talking about that he's going to do is that he's going to change it to where they're not taxing Social Security. So again, that's something else that, I admire.
I know that Trump wants to put a 10% import tax. I can't see how that makes things cheaper, because that just means you have to pay 10% more.
Biden and Harris have done the best in maintaining and building a strong economy, as they say, from the middle class out.
These two major political parties, it seems like, have monopolized the election landscape. And I think that the American people need to know that you don't only have two options.
Now, there's a policy that both of them seem to agree with. It is the no tax on tip policy. What are your thoughts on that?
I didn't even realize it was being taxed in the first place.
I agree with both of them. Don't tax the tips. These guys make, you don't make any money, right?
It's a relatively small amount in terms of the overall economy, but it'll be very good for those people in that industry.
Just leaving it to consumers to pick up the prices doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'd like to read more into it, but yeah, I don't like the tipping culture here anyways.
I get both sides, but it's technically it's income, so you have to go by the letter of the law, right? So, yeah, you'd have to tax it, I suppose.
I think both candidates pander, but when it comes down to who has the best policies.
Taking a look at the results from Wisconsin and Minnesota's primary elections, Democratic Representative Ilhan Omar has won her primary race in Minnesota. She defended her 5th district seat against challenger Don Samuels, a former Minneapolis City Council member. Republican Tony Weed beat 2 contenders in Wisconsin's 8th congressional district race. He won both a regular and special primary election held for former Representative Mike Gallagher's vacant seat. Trump-endorsed businessman Eric Hovde won the GOP nomination in Wisconsin's U.S. Senate race. He will face Senator Tammy Baldwin, who ran unopposed. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg has takeaways and reactions to last night's elections.
Minnesota Representative Ilhan Omar beat Democratic challenger Don Samuels in a close race yesterday. Omar was first elected in 2018 and narrowly defeated Samuels in the 2022 primary. Samuels had criticized Omar's condemnation of the Israeli government's handling of the Israel-Hamas war and said he was very disappointed with his loss. Omar has also criticized Hamas for attacking Israel and taking hostages. She told reporters yesterday she runs on the politics of joy and wants to live in a peaceful world. Omar's campaign reported raising about $6.2 million. Samuels about $1.4. Omar will face Republican Dalia al-Alkidi for the 5th district. She's an Iraqi-American journalist and self-described secular Muslim who says Omar is pro-Hamas. Meanwhile, in Minnesota's U.S. Senate race, Former NBA player Royce White defeated Navy veteran Joe Frazier in the GOP primary. White will challenge Democratic U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar in November. Klobuchar won her primary by a landslide. Minnesota's Democratic Party chair after Klobuchar's win said the senator is focused on bringing people together to get things done. He stated she's consistently ranked as one of the most bipartisan and effective lawmakers in the Senate. In Wisconsin, Tony Weed won both the special and regular primary GOP nomination for the 8th Congressional District. The races had the same slates of candidates competing for former Representative Mike Gallagher's seat. Democratic nominee Dr. Kristen Lyerly ran unopposed. Real estate mogul Eric Hovde beat 2 GOP opponents to win the U.S. Senate Republican primary. He'll challenge incumbent Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin, who ran uncontested. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
And in Connecticut, Matt Curry won the Republican nomination to take on Senator Chris Murphy again. Curry is an entrepreneur who unsuccessfully ran for the U.S. House and Senate in the past. On campaign signs, Curry bills himself as the fighter former President Trump needs by his side. Connecticut voters have not elected a Republican to the U.S. Senate since 1982. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. California and South Carolina could soon limit cell phone use in schools. State officials are urging school districts to restrict or ban the use of smartphones on campus.
For many teachers, cell phones in the classroom have become a major problem. Here's one San Francisco teacher talking about what she faces in school.
It's good for the governor to be considering the needs of our students and our educators in schools where cell phones can become a really intense distraction.
California Governor Gavin Newsom is now sending letters to school districts urging them to restrict students' use of smartphones on campus. In the letters, Newsom said schools should act now to help students focus at school. He cited risks to the well-being of young people.
I mean, as an educator, I had very difficult interactions with students who answered phones in the middle of class, who didn't want to put them away. There are these TikTok and Instagram trends that become very, very disruptive.
Newsom signed a law in 2019 granting districts the authority to regulate students' smartphone access during school hours. Some schools and districts in California have already taken action. Los Angeles Unified, the second largest school district in the nation with more than 500,000 students, recently passed a ban on student cell phone use during school hours that is set to take effect in January. Meanwhile, South Carolina State Board of Education took up guidelines to tell local districts to ban cell phone use during class time. A brief survey of South Carolina teachers in May showed 92% supported limiting cell phone access in classrooms and 55% wanted a total ban. The survey from Education Superintendent Ellen Weaver also found 83% of teachers think cell phones are a daily distraction to learning. But progress can be slow. Several schools already have cell phone bans in place, but those bans aren't always enforced, and students often find ways to bend the rules, like hiding phones on their laps. Some parents have expressed concerns that bans could cut them off from their kids if there is an emergency.
The reason we're not banning a cell phone is because we know that many students need to communicate with their families after school hours for rides, to arrange schedules, for pickups, and things like that.
But even in those cases, many schools have restricted cell phone use to some extent.
We have simply restricted cell phone usage during instructional time. We still allow a cell phone to be on campus. It just has to be turned off and put away.
South Carolina postponed a final vote on a statewide cell phone ban until next month to take more time to craft a proposal.
Airbnb has become a popular alternative to booking hotels. Recently, the travel site said it's seeing lower demand from Americans, but it plans to expand experiences and co-hosting opportunities. NTD's David Lamb spoke with a full-time traveler and blogger about booking and budget-friendly tips.
Grace Moser says she's been a full-time traveler since 2016 and has stayed in countless Airbnbs. She says when booking stays, no matter which platform, she always goes onto the computer to load up the reviews.
The reason why I do that is because when you go to the reviews, you can Command F and you can search for certain words that people are saying in the reviews themselves, so you want to scroll down a good ways in the reviews so you have enough loaded up, and then I'll search for certain words like Wi-Fi or sound or loud, noise, smell, anything like that, because those are the words people normally use to complain about things.
She also says to go into detail when researching because some reviews might be from guests that have stayed a few days as opposed to several weeks.
The one thing I found to really work is to reach out to these Airbnb owners who have a more expensive place to stay, and just be very polite about it, very casual, and just be like, "Hey, I saw your place. My budget for this amount of time is this amount per night or week or a month, however long you're staying." Be very nice about it, very, very polite, and just be like, if this works for you, let me know. If not, I completely understand. You want people to know that like you're very easygoing. You're not going to be like a nuisance or trying to make them feel bad if they can't work with your budget.
Moser says we'd be surprised by the responses and turnout just simply from asking. For more travel or lifestyle tips, Moser and her husband Silas have been running and sharing their blog for nearly a decade now. David Lamb, NTD News.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.